The 2-year growth and reproductive cycle of the mountain hemlock, Tsuga mertensiana, at Crater Lake National Park. We'll pick up this story in January of year 1. It's the middle of the winter, and although the tree is photosynthesizing when possible, not much action is visible on the external part of the tree. Now we're going to zoom in to the tip of a branch, and we're going to investigate the dormant vegetative bud that is growing there. In April and May, during our spring classroom at Crater Lake field season, we'll watch these buds begin to turn green and swell. As the trees approach the summer, these leaf buds become bright green and swell beyond capacity. Right around 4th of July, they will burst open, which is known as flushing or bud burst. These are fresh leaves. Now that may look like a small amount of growth on that one tip of that one branch, but that growth is happening throughout the entire canopy, allowing the mountain hemlock to photosynthesize as much as possible during the growing season, creating food for itself, which then it can grow its branches longer, if only by an inch or two. We will not observe any other external processes on the mountain hemlock for the rest of year 1, as it goes into short days and heavy snows throughout the winter season. However, because the hemlock is an evergreen tree, it will photosynthesize when possible, and internal processes continue even during the coldest, darkest months. We've now began our second year in January. We won't see any action on the tree until we get into our classroom at Crater Lake field season in April and May. Now that we've made it to April, we're going to be looking for a new type of bud. These are axillary buds, and they're tiny and they grow in the armpits of the branches and the needles. In April, they're all going to look the same, but by May, they will have differentiated and will begin growing into seed cones or pollen cones. The seed cones will be longer and brighter purple and be towards the top of the tree, and the pollen cones will be very small and they'll stay green for a bit longer and they'll be towards the bottom of the tree. However, once we're far into our field season and then past into the summer, those pollen cones will swell and they will fully develop and release their pollen in July at the same time that the vegetative buds flush their new leaves. Now that pollen will travel from one tree to the next, and it will hopefully pollinate the female cones on the next tree over, or maybe a tree a mile away. The pollen cones will shrivel and die. However, the seed cones, if pollinated, will continue to grow with viable seed inside. By September, the tree has dried out and the cones will open up, and their seeds are available to be eaten by animals or to ride on the wind with their wing-like shape. During fall classroom at Crater Lake, we'll commonly see the seeds being devoured by either Douglas squirrels or Clark's nutcrackers. Of course, any seeds that are cached in the ground may be lucky enough to germinate and grow into mountain hemlock seedlings. Now that's all of the action we're going to see for year 2. However, the cones, both seed and pollen cones, will not fall off until weathering processes force them to, so they may linger on the tree for years. Therefore, for the Mountain Hemlock Phenology Project, we're not interested in counting any growth from the previous year, including last year's needles, pollen cones, or seed cones. And like any good work of nonfiction, this story does not have a beginning, middle, or end. It is a cycle that repeats for millennia. Now let's take a look at all of the growth and reproductive components that we may see on our trees during the April and May classroom at Crater Lake field season. Dormant vegetative buds are visible throughout most of the tree's life cycle. During April and May, these buds can be found at the tips of branches and they're pointy with small hairs. In early April, they will be tan, and by late May, they will be turning bright green. These buds are expected to flush around 4th of July. While the vegetative buds flush every year, we're now going to look at the axillary buds, which only grow on year 2 of the reproductive cycle. In early April, these buds are all looking the same, and they're all growing in the axils of the tree, or the armpits between the needles and the branches. By late April, differentiation occurs, and the lower buds become pollen cones, while the upper buds become seed cones. At this point, they're pretty tiny. By early May, we'll see that the pollen cones are becoming swollen and bright green, while the seed cones still look about the same. They're holding out and waiting for those pollen cones to be mature before they're pollinated. Finally, in late May, by the end of our classroom at Crater Lake field season, we will see bright purple pollen cones getting ready to release their pollen, and the seed cones will still look about the same. Because this is a cycle, year 1 comes after year 2, just as year 2 comes after year 1. So in year 1 after year 2, when all that action grew on the tree, we still have those remnants hanging around. We may see pollinated seed cones. These will be dried out, open and brown, hanging from the upper branches of the tree. If we look close, we might also see unpollinated seed cones. Now these are still going to be purple. They're going to be spiky and small. These cones, for whatever reason, were not pollinated during the summer. And finally, in abundance, we will see dried out pollen cones left over from the previous year. These are often found in the snow beneath the trees and also in the branches. They kind of look like little sequoia cones at this point, and they're the easiest thing for the students to count. The Mountain Hemlock Phenology Project asks us to figure out what is the relationship between mountain hemlock growth and reproduction and snowmelt timing at Crater Lake National Park. As far as we know, Classroom at Crater Lake Rangers and the students that we lead are the only people in the universe studying the phenology of this tree. That means that this is important work that we're doing, and I thank you for being here to serve your community.